Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm going to be turning a terracotta pot into some bird nest decor. I'm going to be using this terracotta pot that I picked up from a hardware store in Australia called Bunnings. This is going to be my base. I'm also going to be using IOD's Faux Bois mold, specifically the molds that look like wood branches with leaves. I'm going to be dusting the two designs with cornstarch. That's going to help my clay to release, and I am going to be using Das air dry clay. To create my castings, I'm first rolling the clay between my hands and then pressing it into the long design. So you can see that I'm pressing it in and then pushing the excess out. And the micro rim that comes with IOD molds is really helpful for getting a nice clean line. I'm starting with this thicker branch design because on the base of the pot there is a sort of indent. It goes in, and birds' nests usually have a much smoother transition, so using this larger mold down the bottom is going to help soften the harsh edges and make it a more gradual change in width. I'm applying my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of my castings, and now I'm going to start attaching it to the terracotta pot. You can see I have flipped it upside down. This is just going to be the easiest way to work with the castings at this point, and I'm just starting to add those castings. You can see that they actually connect together. They're designed to be interconnecting and to look like a continuous pattern. So I'm going to continue adding the castings, wrapping them around the bottom of the terracotta pot. While most of this design is going to have the castings just winding around one on top of the other, I am going to have a few that sort of cross over each other. I tried to think of what a bird's nest looks like, and they don't have obviously even wood pieces. So now I'm going to switch over to the thinner wood design there, and I'm going to continue pushing that excess clay out until I have a nice clean edge. Then I'm going to flex the mold, flip it over, and the casting is going to fall out. I'm going to add some of my Quickset wood glue, and now we're starting to layer those molds over the top to create sort of a irregular looking pattern, a bit more of a natural looking design. I'm going to continue layering a few different pieces there, and then I'm going to start adding the smaller pieces above the larger pieces. So just continuing that design up the pot until I have the entire outside covered with these castings. Now I selected a terracotta pot because of the strength of the pot. It's going to support my castings really well, but you could use a metal bowl, you could use a plastic bowl. Just make sure that whatever you're using, you know that it can support all of that clay, because I actually ended up using about 1 kilo of clay because I'm also going to be adding it to the inside. I really wanted to create a bird's nest that also had the birds. I wanted to create a table centerpiece essentially, and when I saw the faux bois molds and this lovely wood branch style, almost like a trim design, I thought it would be perfect for this. It already has so much lovely texture built into it, a beautiful natural sort of woodland theme, so it really is perfect for this type of craft. Now I did go a little bit bigger with mine because I want it to be a centerpiece, but you could do a smaller scale version of this with some smaller terracotta pots or some smaller bowls. At this point you can see I'm winding that clay up around the top lip of the terracotta pot, and now I'm going to start working the larger branch designs into the inside of the pot. Because I want to be able to see the inside, I envision it, as I said, as a table centerpiece, I need the inside to look finished as well, and it would look a little bit odd if I only had the beautiful faux bois molds on the outside. I have to continue that on the inside to really make this look like a more realistic bird's nest. So I'm just continuing to add those molds in a circular motion around the bottom of that pot until I have it completely covered. As I got closer to the center bottom part of the pot, I switched over to one of the skinnier branch designs so that it would fit a little bit easier, and I am going to cover the hole in the bottom of the pot with just some more clay and glue that in place. I don't need this to be watertight, this is just for the visual of it. Next, I'm going to be taking some little birds that I thrifted. They're an actual pair, so they go perfect together. And I'm going to be using some Gorilla Super Glue on the base of each of these birds, and I'm going to be attaching it to the terracotta pot. You can see I've pulled some of that clay to the side a little bit so that it's a little bit wider, and I'm just positioning the birds on the edge there and holding them in place. The glue does not take long at all to dry. It only took about a minute for each bird to feel solid and in place. So once they are set, I am going to take another piece of that skinnier wood trim mold, and I'm positioning that underneath the bird's feet again to provide a little bit more support and so that it doesn't look like they're sort of hovering in the air. I then switched to IOD's Viridis mold, and I'm going to be casting some of the leaf designs, and I am going to be positioning those underneath our little birds. So I'm just flexing that, pulling that casting out, and then using my wood glue to glue the castings down. So the faux bois mold does have little leaves in the design. However, I wanted some other larger leaves to layer over the top. If you don't have access to these molds, this is still definitely a craft that you could give a go. You could layer some clay over the top of your terracotta pots and then just make little lines in the clay with a little butter knife. You could use other leaf molds. Really, this is definitely something that you can try. You don't have to have exactly what I'm using. I'm just showing you how I used these beautiful IOD products to get this look. I let my castings dry overnight, and now I'm coming in with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in grey. I only need to apply this to my little birds because they are ceramic, so they are going to need some help for my paint to be able to stick well. So I'm going to apply that with a chip brush. You can see I'm dabbing and stippling that on. I want to create some texture, and I'm going to be doing one coat, letting that dry, and then coming in with a second coat. Once my 2 coats of primer were completely dry, I moved on to the bird's nest. I'm laying down one base coat of Dixie Belle's chocolate chalk mineral paint. This is just a color that I had left in my stash that I'm trying to work through. I don't like to waste any craft supplies at all, so I'm just trying to use this up. I'm going to apply that to the entire inside and outside of the bird's nest, and I'm also going to be applying it over the top of the little birds. I want this to be a base coat that's peeking through some of the other colors that we're layering, so it almost looks like perhaps rust. Once that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Queen's Court mineral paint. I'm going to be applying this beautiful blue over the top of the birds only, and I'm applying it in a dabbing motion. You can see I'm allowing that brush to skip certain sections because, again, I want some of that brown paint showing through underneath so that it looks like it's been weathered and worn away over time. So I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this over both of the birds, and this has a built-in top coat as well, which is definitely going to be handy for the rest of this project. Next, I am going to be using Paint Couture's Gloss Extreme Guard top coat. I'm going to be sealing the chocolate chalk paint that we laid down because obviously that's quite a porous paint still, and I'm going to be layering milk paint over the top, and I want to achieve crackle and texture, and it really does achieve a better result if you put that over the top of a sealed surface. Otherwise it just soaks straight in to a porous surface. So I'm just going to apply 1 coat of the gloss. I went with gloss because it is probably the thicker out of satin and gloss, and then I let it dry. Next, I'm coming in with Fusion's Toasted Coconut Milk Paint. This is one of my favorite colors. It's a lovely cream tone. I'm going to measure out 1 capful of the milk paint, put it in a plastic container, and then I'm going to pour out the same amount of water and add it to the powder. I'm then going to mix my milk paint up with a little milk frother, milk stirrer that I have, and this is actually going to really thicken up that milk paint paint. It definitely gives it a frothy sort of consistency, and I'm going to be applying one coat to start off with. Now, because I mixed it the way I did, it is a little bit more transparent. I probably could have mixed it without that, but I really love the texture that doing this brings. And I'm going to be applying one coat first, and then we will come in with a second coat, which you will see definitely fills everything in really nicely. So I'm moving on to the outside, and I'm really loving how this is catching all of the details of those beautiful IOD molds. I went with milk paint because it has amazing texture. We're going to get that wonderful crackle. However, if you don't have this, you could go with a white paint wash instead of a white water-based paint. Here I am coming in with the second coat of the milk paint. You can see it's starting to fill everything in really nicely. And I am going to be speeding up the drying process on the second coat, because that is when you achieve that texture. That's when you can bring about that cracking, when you speed up that drying process. I do, however, also want to apply the extra layer around the outside first before I start speeding up the drying process. And I am also going to be adding it to the birds themselves, because again, I want these to look old and weathered and chipped, so I want it to look like there's been lots of layers of paint over the years. So I'm applying it on pretty heavy, then grabbing my hairdryer. I've got it on the hottest heat setting, and I'm going to move it around until I have that milk paint dried and until I can see some of that beautiful crackle appearing. Once the milk paint was completely dry, I then took out a wet wipe, and I'm going to start doing some wet distressing. That's the beauty of milk paint, is you can reactivate that paint and you can do wet distressing a lot less messy than doing sanding with sandpaper. So you can see I'm really pulling back that paint on the details of that faux bois mold, and I'm also then going over the top of our sweet little birds to pull back some of that, show some of the chocolate chalk paint underneath, and also of course that Queen's Court mineral paint. Next, I wanted to add some color to the leaves, so I'm going to use Vintage Moss Mineral Paint by Paint Couture. I'm applying it over the top of the leaves that the little birds are sitting on, and also a couple behind them as well. I'm doing this in a messy way because we are not going for perfect here. Once I have finished applying that green, I am then also going to take out a wet wipe, and I will be pulling back some of that paint again to give it a chippy, weathered look. It still wasn't looking quite as aged as I wanted, so I went over with a very light layer of the toasted coconut milk paint. I don't have any extra paint on my brush, it's just what was left on there. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm just going to be applying it to our little birds' beaks on both of them. Again, I'm not going for perfect here. I'm happy for it to look a little bit messy. And then I'm also going to be adding it just to a couple of the leaves around the top, not going for full coverage. I want it to look like perhaps at one point it did have gold gilding on there, and it's worn away over time from being outside in the garden. After I finished applying it to the leaves, I then took out a wet wipe and pulled back some of the excess. When that was dry, I took out a clear wax and sealed the entire piece. When you're working with milk paint, you definitely want to use a wax as opposed to a clear coat, because it can often be reactivated by water-based products, and I want to maintain that crackle and texture that we created, and the water-based paint can sometimes alter the look of this, so it's best to just use wax. I'm then using a microfiber cloth to pull back some of the excess and buff it out, and then I'm going to take out a dark wax and I'm really working it into the details of the faux bois castings, and then wiping it back with that microfiber cloth, really allowing it to sit in the details. If it's a bit too dark, I just take out my clear wax brush again, go over the top of the dark wax, and then I also sometimes come in with a wet wipe that can also help pull back a little bit more. I'm going to be applying this brown wax to the entire piece. I don't want it too dark, but I do want it to have some age, because again, I'm envisioning that this has been out in a garden for many, many years. It's got signs of aging, maybe some dirt. So the dark wax is definitely going to help achieve that and also highlight, as I said, the beautiful details of those molds. If this was perhaps a little bit too grungy for you, obviously you could leave this step out, or if you don't have wax and still want to achieve a similar result, you could use a glaze instead, or a brown paint wash could also work as well. Once I finished with the nest, I moved on to the birds, adding that wax, and I love how this is bringing out the details of those little bird statues, the feathers, their little faces, and again, wiped back the excess. And here's a look at our finished bird nest statue. I love how this turned out. I think it's amazing that the faux bois molds completely transformed what was just a plain terracotta pot. Let me know what you think of today's project in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.